Now, who killed the Nord Stream? Well, the fact that no one is even talking about it, no one is prepared to investigate it, actually is the answer. The European governments involved, the Danish and the German governments in particular, have already stated that they will not be answering questions about the outcome of any investigation that they might be carrying out. In fact, even members of parliament in Germany have been refused on national security ground answers to basic questions about what happened to a piece of their own national vital infrastructure. For me, that answers the question, but there are still idiots out there. I wonder how many, but there were in the initial aftermath millions of idiots out there who were ready to buy the patently obvious canard that Russia had bombed its own pipeline and sent hundreds of millions of dollars worth of their own gas bubbling into the ether, an ether which can be smelt in space, and which, of course, at a stroke, removed any potential Russian leverage over the European economy by virtue of the destruction of the pipeline. Now, the man in front on this question is a young man I haven't met before, but I'm very much looking forward to introducing to you. He's an independent writer, a contributor to Fairness, and his name is Bryce Green, and he's being quoted by people of great importance in the media world these days on the Nord Stream subject. So I'm very glad that he's here with us on the mother of all talk shows this evening. Bryce Green, thank you very much for joining us. We could end our interview in one line, though I promise you we won't. Who bombed the Nord Stream pipelines?
So you're right in saying that we actually don't know for certain. But if you look at the evidence on balance, I mean, all the facts on the ground point to this being an operation done with U.S. complicity. If you go back years, I mean, even to the conception of the pipeline, the U.S. has been against it vehemently. I mean, Obama opposed it. The Trump administration implemented sanctions on people working on the pipeline. The Biden administration has made it a centerpiece of their entire foreign policy in Europe. And you can even go back and look at Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, his confirmation hearings. And he told people that he would do, everything he could to stop the pipeline from going. And fast forward to the beginning of the war. I mean, Biden and Victoria Nuland, another State Department official, they both made, very threatening statements against the pipeline. Biden was asked, he was asked by a reporter, how will you stop the pipeline since this is a German project? And his response was strange. He said, I promise you, I will get it done, or something to that effect. And Nuland, she was saying, well, one way or another, the Nord Stream pipeline will not move forward. And that was their position. And when the pipeline exploded, everyone seemed to forget that. The Western media simply just put all of those statements into a black box and refused to open it. They put all of that history from going back to the Obama years of opposition to the pipeline. They ignored all of it. And instead, they put forth this idea that Russia bombed their own pipeline. In fact, the Associated Press, a widely viewed as a credible agency, they put out a piece that was published, everywhere from Breitbart to ABC, chiding people who believed that the U.S. might have had some complicity as irresponsible conspiracy theorists. Is this a serious media environment that we're talking about? I mean, how could you ignore these statements from the Biden administration, the overt statements by the people who plan U.S. foreign policy that they're against this pipeline, and in favor of advocating another baseless conspiracy theory that Russia blew up his own pipeline? And this was interesting because even members of the media, New York Times, Associated Press, Business Insider, and much more, they were like, well, there's no real clear motive for Russia to do this. But they're probably just sending a message to the West, right? They're blowing up billions of dollars of their own equipment just to send a message to the West. I mean, you only believe that stuff if you've been indoctrinated and inundated with the sort of propaganda that we have here in the West, that the US can do no wrong and that Russia is evil and the source of all evil and is willing to do anything. It's pretty striking. It's pretty striking.
Well, it's the American dream, Bryce. You have to be asleep to believe it. What you've adumbrated there is very powerful, but as when we had a justice system, it would have been said that it's circumstantial evidence. What actual evidence have we got or will ever get about the means that were deployed? Because that would tell us, we know who had a motive, we know who had a record of prior threats, and you've explained that very well. But how was this done? Was it a drone? Was it a submarine? Was it a frogman or frogwoman? Who done it and how?
So again, that's one of those questions that we can only speculate about. But interestingly enough, in mainstream media, Washington Post, Associated Press again, and even all over cable news, there's this refrain that only Russia had the means and the motive to do this. I mean, we just explained how U.S. clearly had a motive to do this. But the means? Well, let's look at the situation. The pipeline sat in about 200 feet of water, right? That sea over there is pretty shallow relative to the rest of the world. Are we really to believe that the U.S. does not have the ability to send any sort of drone or any sort of submarine to lay explosives in this? And by the way, we do know that it wasn't an accident. I mean, seismic data from I believe it was Swedish seismologists. They pretty much definitively claim that this explosion happened in the water, and that it wasn't some sort of underwater or underground earthquake situation. So we know who did it, or we know that it was deliberate. But again, we can really only speculate. People like Jeffrey Sachs have cited the radar data of helicopters, U.S. helicopters in the area around the time of the explosion. U.S. intelligence, they've said, for their part, they've said that they identified Russian warships in the area around that time, but they haven't provided any evidence. And incidentally, there was a plane that captured some of the explosion that went to investigate the area, but suspiciously, several hours of flight data are missing from those planes, and so we're probably never going to know. And Sweden, for their part, they've been doing their own investigation, but they have refused to do any formal joint investigation, citing their own national security reasons. They say that they might be forced to disclose information that's vital to their national security. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know what information that could possibly be unearthed that, doesn't contribute to finding the culprits and imperils Swedish national security. But the fact is that there's going to be a tight lid on this attack, and there's already been a tight lid on the media. I mean, just a few hours ago, I did a Google Trends search for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and there was a peak after the explosion, but it's gone down like significantly, almost back to where it was before the explosion, and that's because people are refusing to talk about it. And we can't, like I said, we can only speculate, but on balance, the evidence points to the United States or one of its allies. There have been theories put forth about this. Some people are sourced into like Russian intelligence apparatus. They put forth their own theories. But like I said, the general public, we're being left out, and you can only guess why.
Who do you mean by their allies? Do you mean us?
Uh, well, it could be the UK, but there's also speculation about Poland, right? Remember, it was a Polish member of the European Parliament who immediately after the attack, they tweeted, "Thank you, USA." And they tweeted a bunch of stuff about how, now Russian equipment is at the bottom of the ocean and how this is such a great thing. And this MP is interesting because he's very well connected. His wife happens to be Anne Applebaum, who I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners are familiar with. Um, Applebaum is part
Sadly,
of the on
yes.
the board of yeah. Applebaum is on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, one of the key institutions that has been at the forefront of U.S. soft power and regime change operations for decades. I mean, even the Washington Post acknowledges that the NAD does what the CIA used to do in private, only now they do it in public. And Applebaum has been, she's a staff writer for The Atlantic. She's been writing all these anti-Russian pieces, and she's very well connected to the U.S. foreign policy establishment. And so the idea that this Polish guy, and by the way, Poland has been adamantly against this pipeline for quite some time as well. But the idea that this high-ranking Polish official, who's well connected to the U.S. establishment, felt comfortable enough to publicly thank the U.S. for the attack and publicly, point fingers in that direction. I think that's significant. Again, it's not a smoking gun in any way, and people will be uh, quick to jump on to say that, oh, there is no smoking gun. But I mean, when you're dealing with state secrecy and wartime secrecy, you're never going to have like full disclosures. You're never going to have smoking guns. Very rarely do you have that, unless there's an outside independent investigation, which we've already discussed isn't really going to happen. And so when you have this guy publicly thank the U.S., I think that it shows that if there are allies that were involved in it, I think Poland is a good suspect in this case. As far as the UK goes, I
Well,
mean, there
that
was good reporting. Well,
go
there was good
on.
reporting done by Kit Clarenberg about the intimate relationship between MI6 and they're planning to blow up the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. And so you've already seen a close link between the UK government and the Ukrainian government, and also Western intelligence or United States intelligence agencies and the Ukrainian government. And so there's really no reason to dismiss any finger pointing at the United States or any of its allies.
Well, this Polish guy is a former foreign minister of Poland. He's currently the head of the EU US parliamentary group in the European Parliament, and his family are so connected to you that you called your military helicopters after them. His name is Sikorsky. Bryce Green, you're a star, and I'm very, very glad you joined us here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, and I hope you'll come back soon as information becomes available.